welcome to another video. This time we're going to be talking about asset deduplication a little bit and providing some pointers about what I hope that you wouldn't do and some things to avoid when it comes to asset deduplication. I do need to first of all explain how the asset deduplication system within a world works, and for that I've got my lovely bookshelf to the right, and then to explain how that might go wrong or be set up incorrectly by a user, I've got some stuff to the right. So we'll go to the left first with this bookshelf. So all assets inside Neos are trying to be deduplicated by Neos. When I say assets, I mean things like meshes, textures, materials, sound effects, you name it, it's probably an asset. I mean, logics isn't an asset, but you know what I mean. So if I go ahead and I inspect this bookshelf, you'll see that this bookshelf here has quite a simple setup, and that's because I've minified it for this video to make it simple. It has a static mesh, which is on holder assets, and a PBS metallic, which is on holder assets. And this is indicating to me that this bookshelf doesn't actually store those assets. So you don't see, if you scroll through here, you don't see the mesh on it, and you don't see the material on it. And this is good because it means that this bookshelf is using the asset deduplication system. To illustrate that, if I go ahead and duplicate this bookshelf, there are now two copies of the bookshelf in the world, but if I inspect them side by side, you'll see here that they are both using the same material. You can check that by the ID at the end. So 2582 BE00, 2582 BE00. So these are both using the same material and also the same mesh. And that's good because it means that there is one copy of the mesh and one copy of the material and all the textures on the material in the world. If you do this incorrectly, or in some cases set it up on purpose for some reason, such that this doesn't happen, then it means that there is additional load on the world because there are multiple copies of that material. To illustrate that, I want to show you one of the ways that you can accidentally trigger this to happen. So over here on the right, as I spoke about previously, I have the same model import dialog for the same model, and we're going to import it in two slightly different ways. So they're both the same to start: 3D model regular, auto scale unknown height, 3D model regular, auto scale unknown height. But in both of these cases, we're going to go into advanced settings, and we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And on the left one here, we're going to check place assets on object. And on the right one here, we are not going to check place assets on object. And then we're going to hit run import on both. And you'll see it's a box of cutlery. This is just a model I found on my desktop when I was recording, and it had the textures loading in perfectly. So let's not question it too much. So the left one here, if I go ahead and inspect it, and I go up in the hierarchy to the root, you see that there's this slot underneath the box called assets, and that this has mesh, material, and also the texture, which is just a picture of it from Walmart. And this is the problem here that occurs, in that the assets are now on this object. So if I duplicate this object, put this one here, and put this side by side, you'll see that they now both have copies of the asset. They both have the mesh, they both have the material, and they both have the texture. If we go to the actual mesh here, on both, you'll see that they're using different IDs here. This is 2794, this is 29C5, and that's the material, and then for the mesh, 2793, 29C5. So both of these objects are using completely different copies of meshes and materials, which means that inside Neos there are two copies of exactly the same mesh and two copies of the same material and two copies of the same texture just floating around in the world. So it means these two are technically less optimal than this one, where I put the assets into the asset system by not checking that value. And so here you'll see, if we go up to the top here, there's no assets, and this is using PBS metallic on material main. And if we go here, you'll see it is up in the asset system. So once again, if I duplicate this box and then open them side by side, they are using the same material, 27877, 27877. And so these, no matter how many I've got, they're using the same material, the same mesh, and the same texture. So there's the difference, and that's one way to trigger it. The other way I've seen to trigger it is actually manual, and I'm not quite sure why world builders are doing this. One reason I think is so that they can have easy access to the materials if they want to change them. That is valid if you are animating the material. So if you're doing like a rainbow material, something that glows, changes color or something like that, you will need to place the asset, at least the material, on that object. I have a video about that linked in the video description called Logics-Driven Material Management, where I talk about placing the asset, the material, on the actual object such that the logics in the animation works. But if you're not doing that, then you shouldn't do it. To illustrate how you go about doing it, whilst saying don't do this, I'll go ahead and modify this bookshelf such that it has that approach. So to do this, usually what I would do, depending on how the asset system works, it might be on the same slot as something else, so I would usually just duplicate the material. So I might make an empty slot here, and I'll call this hey material. And then I'll attach component, assets, materials, PBS metallic. And then I need to go back to the original material here, and I would copy over the properties. In this case, I think it's just the albedo. So there we go. And then I will reset the box to use the material which is on, sorry, the bookshelf to use the material that's on this bookshelf. So there we go. You'll see PBS metallic, and it's got an ID of 30. And now if I duplicate this, should have closed that. You'll say, hey, they're using different IDs here. And so that's what I see a lot of people doing, particularly with avatars, because they want access to the materials or something. Now, when it comes to avatars, move all my boxes out the way so I can go back into third person for talkie mode. When it comes to avatars, people sometimes do it, and the justification is, well, there's only ever one copy of me in the world, and so therefore it's fine that I have the assets on the actual object on me. To that end, I say, hey, what happens if you respawn? Because if you respawn, it means that all of the assets on your avatar will be deleted from the world, and then they'll be reinstantiated once you respawn. So that, again, will add some additional processing time when you respawn. So use the asset system, and what that will do is when you respawn, it will preserve those assets up in the asset system, let you respawn, reuse those assets in the asset system, and therefore it doesn't need to recreate them. Every session by default will clean up unused assets every sort of 300 seconds, but that should be enough time to respawn. What I mean by unused assets is it will look through the asset system and say, hey, there is nothing actually referencing this. So there's no bookshelf, there's no cutlery box referencing this asset, so I can go ahead and delete it. You can also trigger that process manually using the create new, actually I'll just show you. You can trigger that process manually doing create new editor asset optimization wizard. And then you can use this clean up unused asset button. To do that, you need to drop in a slot. So you can go ahead and you can drag in the assets from the top of the world here and say, hey, clean up unused assets. And that'll do it manually, but do note that by default, all sessions have it happening every 30 seconds. No, 300 seconds, sorry. If I go to private UI and go over to session, you'll see that that is here at the bottom here, clean up unused assets, and it's checked on every 300 seconds. And then if you're not worried about respawning, as you still have justification for doing it as an avatar, and there's respawning involved, think about rejoining as well. Like if you leave the world due to a crash and you come back, if it's within those 300 seconds, again, it will pick up that those assets are available to be used and deduplicate them. So wherever possible, put those assets in the asset system, let it deduplicate for you. Don't allow your assets or your systems or your objects to break that deduplication mechanism, because then if there are multiple copies in the world, it can refer all of those back and it becomes more optimal. There you go. That's asset deduplication for you. I hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I know this system is like really technical, so if you do have any questions, let me know. It's difficult sometimes to make these technical videos, but there you go. I will see you next time.